We're going to go ahead and get started. This is the first session in a series of multiple technical, tribal innovation series events that we're doing over the course of about the next 2 months. Today, you're joining us for the Simplify and Automate Database Operations. And just to kind of introduce who's going to be on the call with us today and who kind of makes up the Nutanix Tribes team, you have myself. My name is Justin Razor. And actually, let me turn on video here so you can all see my mug. I'm Justin Razor. I'm the Senior Account Executive for Nutanix, covering Native American tribes. Also joining me is Joanna Kershaw. She's an Inside Account Executive. Eric Katelfu, a Senior Sales Engineer. BJ Velez, a Senior Sales Engineer. And then Madeline, who's our Sales Development Rep, who probably most of you have, how you heard about this meeting. So you're joining us today in, again, a series where we're going to focus on specific technology challenges that tribes are traditionally facing. Nutanix is mostly known for hyperconverged infrastructure, or perhaps you've heard of us as like a hybrid cloud solution. But over the course of the next 4 sessions, we're going to go ahead and focus really in on, specific type of use cases or products within Nutanix that satisfy a bunch of different challenges that we're seeing in the tribal space. So again, today is going to be a focus around databases. That's, kind of why you're joining us. And, databases are incredibly important to pretty much every entity within the Native American tribal landscape. You have casinos, you have healthcare, you have tribal government, and different business enterprises underneath Native American tribes that are all utilizing databases more than likely in some form or fashion. There's a kind of an understanding that databases or data that organizations hold is kind of the new oil for those organizations. In hospitals, understanding, patient data, and casinos understanding, your client's data. And then in the tribal government space, genealogy databases, member roll databases, et cetera, are all very important and critical data sets that the organizations are focused on. Rise of digital business, technology is innovating at an incredibly fast clip. Being able to utilize the data that you contain in your databases and get better value out of it, or be able to, query it faster and do more with that data is important to all organizations utilizing database structures. But really, databases need to evolve. Databases have been around for multiple decades at this point. And most of the kind of current way that people are managing databases or consuming the information in those databases are really incapable of meeting modern demands. And not only that, databases are varied in size and scope and spread and sprawl. So IT and the DBAs more specifically within these organizations are overwhelmed with kind of just the day-to-day maintenance and the upkeep of these databases. So from a business perspective, databases are hurting the business. Too slow to respond to tribal and business needs, being outpaced by competition, perhaps in healthcare and the casino markets. Perhaps another casino is able to better parse their data within their databases, or have a better database structure, or understand their data better. So being kind of behind the curve and your utilization of data can sometimes be a disadvantage. It takes, in a business's eyes, sometimes when they're trying to stand up something that relies on databases, it could take too long, and you're kind of locked in your ability to really innovate and do anything with the data. Costly downtime can affect brand reputation, high maintenance, runaway storage costs. As you start to grow these data sets, the storage that's required to kind of house them becomes very large and kind of unruly from a cost perspective. And then from the IT perspective, the challenges that the IT organization recognizes or has to struggle with when it comes to this type of infrastructure is it's complex. It's very siloed. It's very difficult to manage. Again, going back to the business challenge of slowness to do anything with, you're missing SLAs, perhaps mandated by the organization, be it the healthcare organization, the casino organization, or the tribal government, and they don't scale very well. Downtime causes challenges, as we've stated. If your databases go down that are supporting your application sets, maybe your player management, or if you're a hospital and your databases go down that support things like RPMS or other type of health management record systems, that can be a problem. Not being able to access patient data causes the hospital or clinic not to be able to fulfill patient needs. From a government perspective, genealogy and member roll databases going down or being even critical components of the government's service that it's providing to its tribal members can be problematic too. And then not only that, having databases that are unsecure, they're not being patched regularly, not being able to keep on patches or the management of them cause data breach risk issues, which is a very real challenge that a lot of tribes have dealt with in their genealogy information being compromised just because they weren't able to keep up with patching. The complications around managing that data becomes kind of an attack surface for people looking to exploit the data that's contained in those databases. And what that really leads to is wasted resources, high capex and operational expenditure type activities around just managing this massive amount of data. So with that, kind of setting the stage for the problems that exist with databases as they exist today, or how business challenges and IT challenges kind of view databases, I'm going to bring in BJ, who's going to go through and kind of walk us through, how we at Nutanix treat databases differently, and the theme of this presentation of simplifying and automating databases, how it really relieves a lot of the challenges that organizations face as it comes to this specific work set. So BJ, do you want to go ahead and take over and share your screen out?
Sure, thanks, Justin. So if you can just go to the, I guess we're going to use your slide deck, so we'll just go to the next slide.
I can turn it over to you so you don't have to keep doing the next slide thing if you want. Just bear with us 1 second here. I'll stop sharing.
Sorry, technical challenges.
Oh, fine. Oh, wait, actually, I forgot. So BJ actually lost his internet right before we were supposed to start this. So do you want me to go ahead and just do the presentation because of you working off of a hotspot?
That might be better.
Okay, that's fine. I completely forgot about that little wrinkle. So bear with me 1 moment. Let me reshare that out. All right. Everyone is able to see my screen again, I'm assuming?
Yes.
All right, perfect.
So again, thank you, Justin. My name is BJ Velez. So I'm one of the senior system engineers that support the Nutanix Federal Healthcare team. So today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about ERA and how I'm able to support my customers with the product. So ERA is your database as a service solution. It lives on top of the Nutanix infrastructure, right? And with that, we're able to take advantage of the compute, the power, the networking to be able to provide simplified operations to databases, database management and administration, right? So, what we're doing is essentially, Justin talked about the complexities that we have today in our daily challenges with databases, maintaining them, upgrading them, making multiple copies of them, having copy data and so forth. And those challenges can lead to a lot of downtime and a lot of process, right? In order to, typically, even for a very small environment, if you were to deploy a database today of any significant size or relevancy, you have to maintain it. It has to go through a certain checks and approval process. And what that does is it really stymies the ability to innovate, the ability to be flexible, your business continuity, your disaster recovery. And so as we see, the culture of consumer be able to consume more and more data as it comes in and as we leverage it, the reliance on databases is increasing significantly, right? As well as the challenges, not only maintaining and having that data available, but also protecting that data is becoming a challenge, right? And we use our data differently than we used to, right? So it's not uncommon for customers to maintain multiple copies of a production database, right? And depending on how you leverage or what type of data you have, you may want to keep that data, fairly secure so that you have less possibility of data integrity issues or analytical problems or performance issues and things of that nature. So what we're seeing is that customers are using database copies more often. They're using cloning services. They're having to not only produce data more efficiently and faster because of the demand, but then even those clones that are being leveraged are being scrutinized and audited and so forth, and you may have to maintain them for some period of time depending on what your regulatory or legal requirements are, right? So we're seeing the demand for database management and administration really go through the roof in almost every avenue that our customers are experiencing. And I'll give you an example of a customer that we assisted most recently, right? One of my customers, for example, is the Social Security Administration, and they've leveraged Era to help them with their particular problem. And I'll get into that in a bit, but I kind of wanted to set the stage that, Nutanix Era is your database as a service solution. It's built on top of the Nutanix platform, and it provides for really the streamline and automation of your database operations. So if you can go to the next slide, Justin. So as we talked about before, if you're attending this session, you're already familiar with the Nutanix flexible scale-out architecture. Essentially, you can start with a small cluster of 3 nodes is usually the base solution for a Nutanix solution. And then you can define your services within those 3 nodes and then build out from there. So just as you can scale out with a Nutanix solution from 3 nodes to 300 nodes, you can also do that with Era. And Era can actually take you one step further. We can do single cluster, multi-cluster, excuse me, cluster, cloud, hybrid type of deployments, and really take advantage of the full stack. So go to the next slide. So at its base, right, we have the foundational components of Nutanix. So again, Nutanix Era can be leveraged on a single isolated on-premise cluster or with a multi-cluster type solution, maybe a metro cluster, or even a cluster hybrid solution where you have an on-premise and cloud components. Next. From there, the Era component itself, the solution is really designed around providing hybrid platform services for both patch management, data protection, copy data management, and provisioning. Those are the 4 key tenets of Era. And with that, we build our services around our automation by leveraging not only the inherent components built into Era to define policies and profiles of databases, but also by potentially leveraging some of the other products that we have, really depending on how detail-oriented your environment needs to be. But we can do everything from ServiceNow integration to our business process automation component, right? So our COM, and even have some isolation with our flow. Next, please. And then we can provide both like an application program interface, a GUI, a CLI, and so that you can access. So that you can access the interface for multiple platforms, and then we can support SQL Server, Oracle, MariaDB, SAP HANA, and Postgres. So it looks like we have a couple of people joining. I'm just going to admit them. So as I talked about before, Era is really built on four key components, right? So the first is being the one-click provisioning. So as we talked about before, database provisioning can be complex, right? And we have a lot of different reasons for that. There are different databases to support, different patch levels, different OS levels, different preferences, different applications have different requirements, right? And all those involve different people, usually different teams have to be involved in some layer, some form or fashion in order to produce the appropriate database that's being requested. And what that does is because there's so many teams involved and so many checks and balances, it can definitely decrease the agility that you have to be able to produce those databases efficiently and effectively. So by automating the provisioning process to define pre-approved profiles and software components, you can allow your users, right, whether they're administrators, whether they're end users, whether developers or what have you, to be able to one click provision databases, whether they're databases that are new or whether they're clones or point in time clones of databases that already exist without any intervention or involvement from the extended team. This allows for a lot of flexibility and agility, and especially when it comes to a business continuity and disaster recovery scenario where you may need to recover from an event of a failure and you need to bring that data up as fast as possible, right? When we're dealing with healthcare, we're dealing with potential patient data and time. Usually say time is money, but really in this case, time can be potentially life, right? And so that time to recovery is extremely important when it comes to healthcare data. And so this allows you to streamline the process and not only allow your users to produce databases faster, but do it in such a way that's consistent with the policies set forth by the organization. And that's the most important. Around that, you can also, when you're provisioning, one of the most important things are the SLAs, right? How you want to be able to recover that data should it change, right? So if you're creating a clone or even a new database, you want to ensure that it's protected or it meets the SLA requirements for your recovery. And a lot of times that gets overlooked. So the one-click provisioning process can by default automatically apply the appropriate SLA based on what you define, right? So it can be based on the type of database, the type of data that's within the database, the size, right? There are any number of metrics that can be utilized to set standard SLA algorithms so that they're automatically applied. And this way, what you're doing is you're ensuring that regardless of who is provisioning the database, that data is going to be protected and meet the organization requirements. So the next component is the copy data management, right? So another key component of Nutanix Era. So a lot of times, Fortune IDC did a survey of the top 500 companies in North America, and about 82% of them had at least 10 copies of their production data. And of those 10 copies, about 60% of their storage was dedicated to just copies. That's a lot of data to be put on expensive storage. 99% of us would never put a database on slow, cheap disk, right? It would never happen that way, simply because databases have so many performance requirements and demand requirements that need to be met, even those copies. And so we always want to have the copies of the data on expensive disks because of the performance aspect. And that really can cause a large CapEx investment to any solution. And that's really not what we want to do from a business perspective. So Nutanix Era allows you to create what we call zero-byte copies. And it allows you to quickly clone in minutes databases instantly and then do a redirect on write type of clone, so that you can create your clones, have them available, and have them being leveraged without really, exhausting the storage space required for traditional data copy management. And so that allows you a lot more efficiency. That reason alone is part of the reason why Social Security Administration leveraged Era to meet their challenge. In their case, they had, they have a set of databases that have to be produced and replicated on a monthly, a quarterly, and an ad hoc basis. And when those databases are replicated and cloned, they have to be maintained for a certain amount of time for auditing and so forth. And I won't get into too many details about specifically what they do, but let's just say that it was happening often enough that they weren't able to meet their recovery times and their performance metrics that they were required. So they had that challenge, and they were having, on top of that, the space challenge with copy data manager and so forth. Nutanix Era was able to uniquely help them in creating not only the clones from hours to minutes, literally from hours to minutes, but also to reduce the overall amount of storage that was required to support the solution. They went from being able to produce only a handful of copies on a per monthly basis to more than 10 copies on a monthly basis, and in addition to the quarterly and the ad hoc audit requirements that they met. So Era was significant and strategic to their ability to meet their requirements and move forward with the current solution. So that's how they leverage it. Another component of Era is the database protection. So of course, within Era, we have our one-click database snapshot capability. This is an application consistent snapshot. In that, what we do is obviously with any of the databases we support, we leverage the database best practice and whatever the standard requirements are at the time. Nutanix keeps that updated itself as part of the integration that we do with those software components. But we actually will go out and when we do our one-click database snapshot, we will collect the logs for point-in-time recovery. We'll truncate the logs. We quiesce the database to keep it applications consistent so that you can do that point-in-time recovery. We can support database protection not only natively to Era itself, leveraging Nutanix snapshots, but we can also be used in conjunction with other backup products as well. So there's no need for, if you leverage a current existing backup infrastructure or a part of your data recovery plan, we can simply integrate in with that. So there are specifics around Oracle, SQL, and so forth that are more detailed that we can talk about on a one-off. But needless to say, we again take advantage of the best practices, and we give really the power of protection to the administrator, right? Whether it's via the policy and the SLA, whether it's ad hoc snapshots, whether it's timely based or so forth, whether it's part of a provisioning process, you can be sure to have that capability to have your data protected at any time. And then there's the patching, right? And this is probably one of the most key parts that we see. The biggest problem that a lot of customers have is keeping up to date with all the patches and best practices. And, every product has its own capabilities, right? Supporting Oracle is different than supporting SQL and MariaDB and so forth. And that can be very complex, especially if you're a SQL shop and need to deploy Oracle and you don't really have the Oracle subject matter expertise in-house to be able to support that, that could be a challenge, right? So we take that out a little bit here, and then we're able to support you by allowing a couple things. So, one of the things that we see a lot of customers have is what we call patch pollution. And so patch pollution is where you have multiple copies of different operating systems, different databases, different rev versions, and so forth. And you can have hundreds of these within an environment, and it creates for a complex mess, to be quite honest. And so what we do is with Era, you simply define your profile of what you want your database, Oracle, SQL, what have you, to be able to support, what version, what patch level, and then that profile becomes the profile availability for provisioning and as well for patching. And then your administrators have the option to either roll those patches out automatically or go through a manual patch process guided through Era to be able to move your databases to the next version patch. So what we can do because of our capability for snapshot protection data and copy data management is we can actually take a copy of the database and test it out with the patch, right? So you can ensure that it works and so forth, and kind of give you that check and balances workflow through whether it's a valid patch for you for the organization to leverage. If so, then move forward with the upgrade. If not, then roll back, right? And so you're never interfering or I'm sorry, you're never disrupting your original data. You're using the copies and so forth to be able to validate the patches. And so that's kind of how we move forward. And what that does is because you're able to build those profiles and have that consistency, it allows you to have a more organized, consistent, methodical way of being able to move forward with not only supporting your database administration, but protecting, patching, and then cloning and so forth. So go ahead, do it. Next slide. So as we talked about before, I've kind of highlighted some of these things already, but so the provisioning engine works with some of the common database engines. So again, Postgres, Maria, SQL, Oracle's, SAP HANA. We're constantly adding to this list of databases, and we'll be expanding out. This works on any Nutanix supported platform. So again, if you're local to your on-premise, or if you're leveraging a hybrid on-premise cloud solution, you can be able to deploy that way. The custom software images are the software profiles that we tailor for your particular deployment, right? So your database administrator will go in, they'll define which are the acceptable versions, operating system, what have you, to be leveraged within the environment, and then the SLA is associated and consistent. Um, One of the key things that we have here is the pre and post DB script insertion. So if there is a scenario where you needed to clone a database for whatever reason, and you needed to mask some of the data, you could do that as part of a provisioning process, right? So and I'll just use an example. If you had to take some patient data and you needed to share it out, but you wanted to remove some of the HIPAA-based information, you could use a postscript insertion component within ERA to define the automatically masking of those components, right? So that's kind of some of the advantage that we have there. And then, of course, we can support Oracle RAC and some of the SQL Always On and the other HA type environments. Next slide. So a standardized database catalog. So if you can see from the screen here, this is an example. ERA is built on top of the Nutanix cluster and built within the Nutanix HTML5 responsive design administrative interface. So in this case, what you're doing is you're creating that standard profile as I described before, choosing the database sets, the character set, the size, the expansion, any type of growth capabilities, SLAs, and so forth. And then you can create a set of standardized profiles as well as customizable profiles. And then use your role-based access control to define who has the ability to do what, right? So you may allow, for example, standard copies of cloned databases to be pushed out for so many days, have such an SLA and so forth. And then allow alternative copies to be released on a specialized basis depending on user permissions and so forth. But again, the administrator has the power to kind of define and create the set of how they want to support the environment within the Nutanix cluster. And then ERA will allow the end users to be able to single click provision without worrying about that interaction. Next slide. So sophisticated SLAs and continuous RPO. So we talked about that. As you define your SLAs, you can define different bands of SLAs. We'll by default add a few different basic SLAs to kind of get you started, essentially giving you some basic RPO objectives, but you can feel free to customize any additional SLAs as you deem necessary. And again, they can be based on any various metrics or parameters, right? Whether it's database size, database type, the type of data being used, the organization that's adding that particular database or what have you. There are a lot of different controls that you can use to define the SLAs and how you want that to be saved and the data to be collected, and then what you want to do with it from there, whether it's archived, whether it's replicated to a secondary site, or what have you. That can all be driven. And on top of that, as you create these different tiers of SLAs, you're providing some level of consistency and some level of defaults, right? So you always have some standardization across your databases for data protection. Next slide. So again, as we talked about before, the Nutanix copy data service is a 0 byte redirect on write type of snapshot. It's called time machine, which I think is a little funny if you guys are Mac users. But it's space efficient, so you can create multiple clones without consuming large amounts of storage data, which is always the CapEx bulk of our cost here. But what it does is it allows you to create the snapshots with point-in-time recovery. So we use obviously the best practices of whatever native database that we're supporting, but based on your SLAs, you can go through and create their snapshots. So depending on your particular preferences, we have a lot of customers that will, they'll have any number of array of data protection schemes, right? You'll have some customers that do a daily snapshot with log truncation every 15 minutes. You'll have others that do an hourly snapshot. You'll have some that do an hourly snapshot with a daily recovery and so forth, right? But what the time machine capability allows you to do is it provides you this kind of graphical calendar-like interface to be able to go through to point in time, find the day and time and the exact snapshot that you want, and be able to not only recover from to that point, but able to clone an additional database from that point as well. So if you think about from a casino standpoint, right, and I've never worked with any of the tribal casinos before, but I have worked with another casino. In that example that I worked with them once before, they had an incident where there was something that happened within their casino databases on a particular day at a certain time of the month, and they needed to identify the data and trouble through the data for that particular day. So they leveraged Time Machine to create a clone of, I think it was a couple of weeks before at the time, create a clone and use that clone with certain SLAs and certain permissions for people to be able to go through and analyze the data, right? And so that type of recovery, that type of automatic log connection to point in time is crucial and essential. And the most key part here, again, is the 0 byte database capability, right? So we're not consuming a lot of storage to be able to produce a lot of performance and a lot of results. Next slide. So the one-click DB refresh. So this is the fast clone creation. This is the leveraging the same database point-in-time capability to refresh your databases. So if you have clones of databases that you're using for, of your production database that you're using for analytics or for testing or for patching, it may periodically need to have data updated, especially when it comes to, casino or healthcare data. That data is usually rather active, right? So typically, an average financial database, has anywhere from a 20 to 40% change rate. A healthcare database, depending on how active the environment is, could be somewhere in the same type of range. And so having an updated copy of the relevant data for testing, for cloning, for patching cases is significant. So our one-click DB clone refresh capability allows you to update your clones without having to go through a large, you know, uh, or George's process of refresh, right? Going through all the different components and different teams. So it just makes it easier and streamlines. Sorry, we have a couple other people joining. So go ahead and click next. Sorry. So we talked about the backup capability, so leveraging the snapshots. Again, not only can we have snapshots created as part of the SLA, but we can do it ad hoc. We can do it via third party. So if there's an event, this is probably the most important part. So there are going to be times where there could be an event that triggers the need for a backup. So depending on how you run your environment, it could be a link loss, could be an internet outage, could be power loss, could be any number of things that happen. Could be periodically based on downtime, based on a security event or what have you. And there's going to be times where you need to be able to back up the database and get a snapshot so that you can use it not only for recovery purposes, but for business continuity and disaster recovery as well, whether you have replication jobs that run. So our one-click DB backup allows you to create that snapshot or kind of ad hoc when you need to, in order to be able to leverage that for a later use case, right? When you need to do a recovery. So again, because it's a snap, because we're using the native technology, it's application consistent. We're going to quiesce the database. We're going to truncate the logs. We're going to give you that point in time and give you that quick recovery. Next slide. So we talked about the patch management capability again. So from here, what we're doing is we're creating software profiles of the approved database and operating system softwares that we're going to support. So as a new database patch comes out, as a new rev version comes out of the OS or what have you, administrators will typically go through and want to not only test to ensure that it's valid, but then want to essentially make that not only the default, but also push that out to the replication. So what you can do is create various software profiles that have all these various components in it, right? The version of Oracle, the version of operating system, and so forth, and to be able to leverage that as part of your upgrade process. Now, again, as I talked about before, the different products have different capabilities. So like with Oracle, for example, you can simply create the new profile, and then it goes through a process of connecting the virtual machine disk to the new binary drives and so forth. There's a whole process that happens about. But in the background, what's essentially happening is we are handling that upgrade patch process for you out of place in best practice what the software requires. Your job as the administrator is simply to define what is the appropriate level of software and operating system that not only can be supported, but that you want to be able to support, right? There are certainly times where there's going to be, multiple copies and multiple software versions, and there's a fine line between patch pollution and flexibility. But you can have a little bit more control of what's being able to deliver here by creating those profiles and having them roll out automatically. Next slide. So Nutanix is completely open, Nutanix Error, I should say, is completely open with a REST API. And so this gives us the capability to leverage tools such as ServiceNow, such as Calm, such as some third-party tools even, to be able to access data that exists within Error to perform whatever function you require, right? So if you're using a native application that's outside of Nutanix, but has the ability to speak to our REST APIs, you can feel free to take advantage of that and continue to use your tools, right? So that really is the openness. One of the other things that we're able to do is, as I described before, is, with the database provisioning process, there are a lot of steps involved, right? So it can be as simple as simply deploy software or go through multiple steps and multiple layers, integrating to different teams and so forth. So if you have something that's a little more complex, or the solution needs to be, have a lot of checks and balances and approvals, or maybe it needs to get data that's ad hoc, right? So if there is a parameter that requires data, let's say, for example, like the financial markets that I work with, the data that they use is always based on whatever the stock price is at the time and so forth for their markets, and they have to get that information ad hoc. You can leverage our business process automation to really drive the overall processing of that. So when you have that kind of capability where you need to have a little more check and balance, or you need some ad hoc real-time data, COM, our business process automation component, can really drive that for you. And what's nice about that is you can really just build out maps to kind of define that business process and then manage the process. What that does is not only gives you the or validates that the process that you're following is consistent, but it's consistent amongst all your databases and consistent amongst time, right? Because it's one thing to provision 1, 2, 3, 4 databases. That's not a big deal. But when you're producing hundreds, if not thousands, it's hard to keep track of all that. So leveraging a tool like COM allows you to not only automate that, but be able to go back and audit and validate that the provisioning of that database and anything that's associated with it follow the process defined by the organization. Next slide. And then within the admin interface, we provide a full visibility into the database operations, right? So an administrator can go through and see just like you would in the Nutanix cluster now, you can go through and see all the different tasks being associated, the different clones being created, when they were created, who created the clones, based on which snapshot, what SLAs associated, any errors and audit trails that need to be on it. It's a full visibility dashboard that's provided, right? And it's nice because it's menued in such a way that it can give you a very simple interface into seeing what's going on to a very drilled down, detailed interface to provide you with the relevant information you need in order to make decisions. And that can be exposed not only in the admin interface, but also through any APIs or third-party tools that you may be leveraging. And then one of the other things that we've done here is we've introduced tags. Now, it might seem a little strange to add tags to databases, right? Because nowadays when we think of tags, we think of hashtags and Twitter tags and so forth, right? But the tags in the database here are relevant because it gives you that flexibility to be able to find the information you need differently, right? So the tags can be associated based on some of the basic information, such as the database name, the snapshots, the clone, the server itself. It can be associated with a cost server. It can be, a custom tag or what have you. And so what that does is, again, if you're provisioning a few databases, it's not so relevant. But if you're provisioning thousands of databases or hundreds even with clones, right, you may have certain tags to show, greenfield, brownfield, production versus test versus, your monthlies, your quarterlies, your ad hoc audits. And all those different things allow you to have historical relevance so that when you've been doing this for a while, you need to go find that database from 5 months ago that was associated with a one-off, clone of a production data at the end of the month of your financials. You can tag it in such a way to make it easier to find, right? So that you're not searching through logs and going through it. It makes it a lot easier. And then the roles-based access control, right? The most critical component of all this is being able to make sure that only the right people have the right access to the right type of data, right? And so we can, here are some default roles that we have, but you can really pick and choose how you want to roll these things out. So for example, you can define that, a certain group of policies for basic production data versus certain groups of authority for your copy, your clones, and so forth, and really kind of control who has access to what to give you a more fine base of security around the data that you're being able to support. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Justin.
Yep. Thanks, BJ. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we covered, in that portion that BJ was covering. But really, the kind of takeaway that I hope people take, out of this seminar is that, what Nutanix is really focused on from pretty much just our in our DNA as a whole is really simplifying things that are traditionally very complex. So with databases, as we've seen, there's a lot that goes into managing and patching and deploying databases. And with Nutanix Era, what we're trying to do is we're trying to strip away a lot of just kind of the manual, very intensive task, and really make it a very simple kind of point and click way to deploy databases, and manage those databases and keep those databases safe and secure and patched. So, that's really the takeaway for this portion. If there's further interest outside of just kind of what we presented at a real high level here, and you want to talk more about how Era may or may not be applicable to your specific use cases around your database structures, reach out to us. We'd love to have a little bit more of a tailored meeting for what's important to you, and try to understand what you're doing, and perhaps where we can assist in some of those challenges that you're facing. The other thing to mention about Nutanix, in pretty much every product that we have, from our kind of core hyperconverged infrastructure, to work from home, to things like Era, is that we offer the ability to essentially test drive these products on our website. So if you go to nutanix.com/test-drive, there are different modules for different products within Nutanix that you can click through and kind of go through like mini labs to kind of get a little bit of a feel for how the environment actually works, how it is to kind of administer it. So that's a really nice resource. A lot of people have been taking a lot of advantage of that, and getting more out of it than us just sitting here and presenting the information in a PowerPoint setup. And then kind of wrapping things up here, in addition to kind of this overview of Era, we also try to do things that are a little lighter, especially with people, being kind of locked in their houses for who knows how much longer. We do have a virtual event coming up, Hands-on Heat with Nutanix. It's Thursday, January 14th from 3:30 to 5:30 Eastern. And the focus of that event will be to, it's actually a hot sauce making class. So we will ship you all of the ingredients needed to essentially make a hot sauce. And then there will be a live session where we essentially go through and help you prepare and create the hot sauce and bottle it. And then there will be a little bit of product placement, I guess, sprinkled in there with a little bit of a recap of database operations with Era. So, if you're interested in that, please reach out to us. Our email address is tribes@nutanix.com. And then we can help you get registered and set up for that if that's something you're interested in. And finally, this is a kind of a series of technology seminars that we're doing for Tribe specifically, the Tribal Innovation Series. As you can see, you are here. You are in the Simplify and Automate Database Operations portion of the series. And then in the coming weeks and months, we have the next session will be Work from Anywhere solutions. So that'll be really focused around end user computing, desktop as a service, telework, whatever you kind of want to label it as. That will be Thursday, January 14th. And then we have another one for Zero Trust Security later on in January. And then the final one, wrapping everything up, will be Protecting Your Apps, Data, and Service from Downtime, which will be really talking about disaster recovery as a service. As I know a lot of my customers, they may have a reservation that, is relatively small, and they don't have a very, they're concerned about disaster recovery, but they don't have a good strategy or plan around it. So we'll be talking about that specifically in the last session. And then just as a kind of, reward, if you attend 2 out of the 4 sessions that we're running in this series, we will send you a Nutanix swag kit. And then if you attend 3 out of the 4 sessions in this series, you'll be entered to win a pair of Apple AirPod Pros. And that's really the end of the session. There are 5 minutes left. I just wanted to open up if there are any questions or comments that anybody who attended today's seminar would like to, bring up while we have BJ and the rest of the team on the call. Give it a couple seconds here. See people want to unmute. Understand that was a lot to go through and you might have to get to other things. So we do appreciate you taking the time today. We hope that we see you register for some of the other events in this seminar that we're doing or in this series that we're doing. And if you have any questions, please, again, reach out to tribes@nutanix.com. And we look forward to having conversations with you in the future. Thank you.